Hello, welcome to CGTN's roundtable discussion on inter-civilizational communication and mutual learning. I'm Pan Deng. We bring you this special event from the China National Academy of Governance in Beijing. In March this year, Chinese President Xi Jinping put forward the Global Civilization Initiative, calling for respect for the diversity of civilizations. He said countries need to let cultural exchanges transcend estrangement, mutual learning transcend clashes, and inclusiveness transcend any sense of superiority. The civilizations of China and Europe in the Axis Age pursued common values such as community, virtue, harmony, justice, and friendship. Since modern times, China and Europe have maintained close cultural exchanges and mutual learning. In our roundtable, we'll examine the history of cultural communication between China and Europe and further discuss how these two ancient civilizations should exchange and learn from each other in the present to remain vibrant. And for more insight, we're joined in our studio by Ms. He Fangying from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences and Associate Professor Alexei Levis from Renmin University of China. Thank you very much for joining us, dear guests. If you don't mind, I'd like to call you both travelers between different civilizations, whether it's in physical terms or in spiritual terms. I think it's fair to say that Chinese and European civilizations are no stranger to each other, but can we go a little bit beyond that, saying that these two are actually acquaintances in a historical perspective?
Our culture had many things in common, and especially a kind of deep history and quite continuous history, despite of many problems, of course, and many rupture. But we have that in common, and we are sharing the same great continent. So knowing each other, but maybe becoming intimate to each other.
Well, talking about sharing the same continent, that is the Eurasian continent, the massive continent, I believe you just talked about. And let's trace back to history and starting with this ancient Silk Road. How did the two sides know each other through this route, and what is its historical implication?
That's very interesting and complex. Why? Because the Silk Road, it is a very ancient mean of communication, and that didn't work so well at that time. It was very perilous voyage and journey with many merchant goods issues. Well, it seems that the communication between the two poles of Eurasian continent is not so easy to reach. And we've got, fortunately, in the middle, the Arabs that helps European to get some amazing Chinese innovation, of course. And what an innovation. Paper, printing, compass, and gunpowder. Gunpowder for the worst and the best, because if you think about French Revolution, without guns, there is no French Revolutions. So it's very interesting how some Chinese innovation that came from Arabs indirectly transformed deeply the fate of Europe.
Right. So, Professor, earlier you mentioned this urgent sense from yourself of a deepening understanding between Chinese and European civilizations and all civilizations in the world, really. And I believe that's why you two are here in Beijing participating in this forum on inter-civilizational communication and global development with your global colleagues. So, talking in present terms, how do you think the two sides should deepen this understanding?
I think the relationship between university must be enstrained. We have to improve the communication means, concrete one, train, roads between China and Europe for creating something concrete. Without concrete way of living together, it's only chit-chat. It remains superficial. We have, in a certain way, to live a bit more together.
You just said it's not only about roads and physical links, but we need to do a little bit more on that. What do you mean by a little bit more?
Without knowing each other, really. That is to say, organizing some sojourn You can live really with Chinese people, learn Chinese language. It remains always too distant. I spoke about intimacy, and I think it's the key point. Because we are a civilized civilization, it's interesting to be intimate, because there is something like an alchemy in that.
But since we're talking about civilization, it's a grand term, right? It's actually about politics, economy, culture, social life, and even philosophy. But eventually, you have to deal with the combination, if not convergence, of all these items we just talk about. But in realistic terms, how will you deal with some practical difficulties? Let's face it. I believe you've all heard the strong Western rhetoric on so-called decoupling, de-risking with China, or in other terms, healthy competition, if you will. That will eventually affect your cultural exchanges, people-to-people communication. How would you deal with that in realistic terms?
There are many global political issues and make the people suffering, obviously. But so I think solution is always in concrete creation. That is to say, creating a center in Europe, Chinese center in Europe, creating European center in China. It's always stuff like that. And I think the most important are the young people. And so we must educate each other to know each other. So there are concrete things to do. If, for example, even in high school, organizing visits for French or German or English young students in China, and reverse. They are familiar, and there is not this always caricatural way of judging each other.
What's your take on this, Ms. He? Have you also sensed this urgency for the two sides to get more intimate, as Professor Levis just mentioned?
You know, the interesting thing is, this term I teach in the Tsinghua University. That's most interesting is my pupil, they studied ancient Greek and Rome. That's most interesting is when the Chinese students learn the foreign literature, and the German and the French and other countries in Europe learn the Chinese. Yeah. Yes. When they beginning learn the foreign literature, they feel the difficult. But when they more and more learn, they feel the interesting and fantastic about the wisdom of the foreign literature. Yes.
What are the responses from your students, both on the French and
Chinese
Chinese side? Yeah.
For my part, I remember when I was a young professor in University of Normandy in France, I was the first to open a course about Sanjiao, the three teachings, that is
right.
Rudia, Daodia, Fodiao. And my course was the most popular. The students were really naturally interested by this stuff, and especially in France, and that is to say, by knowing another civilization, because they are young and they want to know the world. So it's something like natural.
Right. Well, what's your experience in this regard, Ms. He? Turning curiosity into actual learning and understanding.
We are different because I'm teaching my students about the Great Book. That's most important. Is teach them how to know the same problem. We know both the question in the human being is a thing. They know the virtue, they know the beauty, and they know and they learn them logical and methods. And when they learn the Asians wisdom, they know, oh wow, nowadays we face the same problem. It's not different between the Asian and nowadays, and they will become the more and more know the problem nowadays China. Yeah.
I think you just raised a crucial question here. How do those ancient days relate to nowadays and even to our future? So I believe you met quite some global colleagues in recent days right here. How would you explain them to China's civilizational past, to its proposed orientation for the future. That is the Chinese path to modernization. How would you explain that to your European colleagues, to your global colleagues?
In the 15th century and 17th century, there are a quarrel between the Asian and moderns. When my students know the quarrel, they will think how they solve the problem nowadays. Yeah.
Right. So what about you, Professor Levis? What's your understanding, from your background, understanding China's path to modernization?
That's a very, very tremendous history in terms of civilization, what happened to China during this last century. It happens to no civilization to change as brutally in a certain way and as quickly. So there is a deep work to do for the new generation to find a new way to understand the classics, to understand what does it mean to be Chinese. That's a really tremendous job to do, but it's passionating in a certain way. And I think the challenge of China is really cultural now. That is to say, entering in something, being a great actor in the global history. Now it is done for China. And now you have China must become modernly Chinese, really Chinese, genuinely Chinese, as an actor of the global world. That's a great dialectic in a certain way.
What about you, Ms. He? Have you tried to find answers to the future from our ancient civilizations?
I think when we come back from the beginning of the great civilization, I think the most important things we will back to the wisdom of the Asian. You know, actually they are not the remote people. Actually, they are living with others together, with us together, because they face the question we facing again. So I told my students they should using the wisdom of the Asian to facing the nowadays question, such as the poor, the rise of living. So I think that in the future, I think from transform the communication between the Europe and China, we will more and more cooperation with us to facing both question in the nowadays.
So what kind of cooperation are you looking forward to as an educator, as an academic, as a researcher? Because there have been some frameworks around, but what are more opportunities you are looking forward to under these frameworks? For example, the Belt and Road Initiative. It's not only about physical infrastructure, it's also about connectivity between different policy agendas and people's minds.
I think in terms of population, we are acting quite friendly between Chinese people and European people. French people love Chinese culture very normally. And I think we should work because on communication and especially on the journalistic level. Why? Because there are many bad messages sometimes and very warlike message in terms of high standards communication, and this ruins everything. So I think there is an effort to do to speak about each other nicely, because we are not enemies at all, not at all. Remember, Europe, China, we are the two poles of the most civilized continent of human history. That's not nothing.
Thank you very much, Associate Professor Alexei Levis from Renmin University of China and Ms. He Fangying from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. And that's it for this roundtable discussion on CGTN, on inter-civilizational communication and global development. I'm Pan Deng in Beijing. Thanks for watching.